And welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case, and tonight global markets crash as fears of a recession grow. Kamala Harris announces her VP pick, and potential terrorists continue to cross the southern border into the U.S. And of course, still filling in for Renata Kiss, who's still on vacation, is FISM's Ian Patrick. Welcome, Ian, as always.
Thank you so much, Sam. It is always a pleasure to be alongside you hosting the show. And I have to say right now, I am thankful that we work at FISM, especially since we have financial issues as a reference for stories like that global market one you were just talking about. That helps to have that sort of clarity on that.
Yeah, it does give you a little bit of background. So we will start with that story. The U.S. stock market, as I said, is seeing a slight rebound after yesterday's historic market slump. The Dow Jones was down more than 1,000 points when U.S. markets opened yesterday, triggered by Friday's dismal jobs report for the month of July. Financial Issues host Shanna Burt broke down that report earlier this morning.
So the jobs report last Friday said that the U.S. economy added 114,000 jobs in July, well below the downwardly revised number of 179,000 for June and well below the forecast for 175. Market was expecting 175. We got 114,000. This is the lowest level in 3 months. It's below the average monthly gain that we've been seeing of 215,000. So, over 100,000 less than the average that we've been used to.
The crash echoed a major collapse in global markets, with Japan seeing its biggest single-day drop-off since the Black Monday crash of 1987, brought on by rising interest rates. The tech industry saw some of the steepest declines, dropping 4% on the S&P 500. According to the Wall Street Journal, major tech companies such as Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, and others lost a combined total of $753 billion yesterday morning. Economists at Goldman Sachs now believe there's at least a 25% chance of a U.S. recession in the next 12 months, with J.P. Morgan analysts saying it could be as much as a 50% chance.
And in the midst of such an economic event, U.S. voters are reminded of how important it is for a president to know how to handle the economy. A recent Wall Street Journal poll, for example, suggests that more voters seem to trust Donald Trump on that issue over Kamala Harris. According to that poll, 52% of voters trust Trump with the ability to handle the economy, whereas Harris only eked out a 40% vote, meaning that Trump has a favorable 12% lead on that topic alone. Harris also happens to be bogged down by current voters' perceptions of economic conditions under the Biden administration. According to Gallup's most recent finding on this metric, voters since at least July of last year think that the economy is not at its best under the current administration. For July of this year, 46% of Americans rated current economic conditions as being poor. And in addition, 70% of U.S. voters said economic conditions are getting worse, at least as of July of 2024, showing how much of a consistent thorn the economy has been under both Biden and Harris.
And this comes as Kamala Harris this morning announced Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate for the 2024 presidential election. The announcement came as a bit of surprise to many political analysts who widely believe that Harris would pick the more moderate Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. By picking Walz, Harris appears to be shoring up her more progressive base with an ideologically consistent ticket, similar to that of Donald Trump's pick of J.D. Vance. Walz began his political career as a moderate, but over time, the two-term governor and former congressman has pivoted more and more to the left.
But we can get out there, reach out, make the case. And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
A society that does not put equity and inclusion at the center of it is certainly going to eventually come to the places where we're at.
Should Minnesota be a sanctuary state?
If the definition of that is that the federal government enforces immigration law and local law enforcement enforces local law, then yes.
Should cities be allowed to be sanctuary cities?
Yes, local control.
Already, Republicans are attacking Walz for his left-wing record, especially his handling of the George Floyd riots that swept Minneapolis in the summer of 2020.
We all remember the BLM riots of 2020 in Minneapolis. Those were riots that Harris egged on and raised money to bail out the rioters with the Minnesota Bail Fund. And they're riots that Tim Walz, as governor, sat back and let happen. He sat back and let the city of Minneapolis burn. That city has been gutted as a result of those riots.
That was Florida Governor Ron DeSantis earlier today. The Trump campaign also released a statement calling Walz a, quote, dangerously liberal extremist.
All right, moving now to the Supreme Court, where Justice Neil Gorsuch warned against what he sees as a growing trend of federal agency overreach. This coming from his new book titled Overruled: The Human Toll of Too Much Law, where Gorsuch criticizes federal agencies for acting as both prosecutor and judge. He even pointed to data showing a rise in cases being barred from public jury trials as an example. In an interview with CBS, the Supreme Court Justice said the following.
I've been a judge now for about 18 years, and I just saw so many cases where ordinary Americans, decent, hardworking Americans, were just trying to make their way in life. They weren't trying to hurt anybody, and yet they were caught up in the legal system in ways they couldn't hardly expect.
Both his book and statements come as the Supreme Court ruled against federal agencies in recent cases. And this includes ending the long-standing Chevron doctrine, which had allowed agencies to interpret some law. Gorsuch also highlighted in his book how the Social Security Administration denies 60% of disability applications, while only 1% of claims were decided by a federal court. Gorsuch will be entering his 7th year as a Supreme Court justice since being nominated by President Trump back in 2017.
And his comments come as the Supreme Court is now declining to intervene in President Donald Trump's criminal conviction in New York. Missouri AG Andrew Bailey took an unconventional step last month by opening a lawsuit against New York. He wanted Trump's sentencing to be postponed until after the election, arguing it would harm voters. Alaska, Florida, Iowa, and Montana all backed that lawsuit, but the Supreme Court rejected it yesterday without explanation. Trump is now scheduled to be sentenced on September 18th. All right, and coming up next, we'll shift into some international news where the UN fires some of its staffers for ties to October 7th as Iran now prepares to retaliate against Israel. Those stories and more after this short break.
There are moments in life that define us. Choices determine the courses we take. Choices that create life, or those that save a life. And some make life worthwhile. There are decisions to stay or to go, to remain the same or to grow. Sometimes we pray and make peace. Other times we take a stand for what we believe. In celebration, mourning, triumph, and defeat, we are invested in every decision we seek. Despite differences, we have one thing in common: the desire to do all for the glory of God. Keep your wallet aligned with your heart and your investments in harmony with your faith. Timothy Plan, biblically responsible mutual funds, ETFs, and retirement plans. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing.
On January 21st, 1824, a baby boy was born in Clarksburg, Virginia. His name was Thomas Jackson, and during the American Civil War, he would become the second most famous general of the Confederate Army after General Robert E. Lee. Most people do not recognize him by his given name, but many do know him by his legendary nickname, Stonewall Jackson.
To watch more episodes of A Moment in History, go to FISM.tv.
Tragically, and all too often, a young mother in an unplanned pregnancy is in crisis. You can be there for her by giving a life-changing ultrasound through Preborn. Seeing her baby on ultrasound is a game changer, doubling the chances she will choose life from 40% to 80%. For only $28 a month, less than $1 a day, you can show a mom her baby on ultrasound.
And welcome back to FISM News. I'm Ian Patrick. Let's continue with some international coverage here, starting with the United Nations, where 9 staff members of the Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees were recently fired for potential involvement in the October 7th attack against Israel. That agency, also known in shorthand as UNRWA, has long been speculated to house people that are at least associated with Hamas. Following an investigation from the UN Office of Internal Oversight Services, UN Deputy Spokesperson Farhan Haq said that there was enough evidence to discipline those 9.
The Office of Internal Oversight Services has completed its investigation into 19 area staff members of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, regarding allegations of their involvement in the armed attacks of the 7th of October 2023 in southern Israel. OIOS made findings in relation to each of the 19 UNRWA staff members alleged to have been involved in the attacks. In respect of the remaining 9 cases, the evidence obtained by OIOS indicated that the UNRWA staff members may have been involved in the armed attacks of the 7th of October 2023. The employment of these individuals will be terminated in the interests of the agency.
Now, you may have noticed that he did say may have been involved, and it's exactly that kind of language that led to the briefing becoming rather contentious as reporters tried to get more details out of him regarding the investigation. Haq did not expound on what information led the investigative group to fire the 9 staff members, and the press grew increasingly frustrated at other non-answers on how they will continue with these cases.
With all due respect, I think this is not really sufficient given all the million of funding for UNRWA when we had a half-year-long investigation, and in the end it says, yeah, they were involved in the attacks, but we don't tell you how.
Any chance OIOS could do a briefing for us? Because, this is really opaque, and you kind of mumbled at one point confidential. Is this report confidential, or is it going to be published? Or
it is
where
confidential.
Does it go?
It will not be published.
Why won't it be published?
All such reports are confidential.
Meanwhile, the Middle East is on edge as Iran prepares to unleash a retaliatory attack on Israel for the killing of Hamas's top political leader last week. The attack has the potential to be massive in scale should Iran activate its various proxy groups, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, among others. Now, no one is exactly sure what Iran is exactly planning, but it could be similar to the attack back in April, when Iran launched hundreds of rockets and drones at Israel following their attack on an Iranian embassy. Israel, with the help of Western allies, successfully defended itself at the time, but a much larger assault might not be so easy, especially if Hezbollah gets involved. It's estimated the proxy group has over 100,000 missiles and rockets, which could easily overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome defense system. According to Axios, U.S. intelligence believes a 2-wave attack is most likely, one from Hezbollah and then the other from Iran and its other proxies. The attack is expected any day now.
Meanwhile, in neighboring Iraq, at least 5 U.S. personnel were injured following a Monday attack on a military base. 2 rockets were fired at Al-Assad Air Base in western Iraq, with one source suggesting that the rockets even fell inside of the base. It was unclear whether the attack was linked to recent threats from Iran that Sam mentioned, especially those over the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. Iran has said the U.S. does bear some responsibility in the assassination because of its support for Israel. However, the U.S. did also conduct a strike in Iraq last week against supposed militants preparing to attack U.S. and coalition forces. U.S. officials who spoke to Reuters said that one of the wounded Americans was seriously injured, and right now a post-attack assessment of the damage is underway.
That's where the U.S. surrendered its final base in Niger, or Niger, depending how you say it, to the nation's ruling military junta yesterday. It's another blow to the counterterrorism operations in the larger region, with broad ramifications for Africa. Multiple Islamic jihadist groups operate in the Sahel region of Africa, which is a vast area just south of the Sahara Desert. Until recently, the U.S. and France jointly stationed more than 2,500 military personnel in Niger to keep those groups in check. Now the Defense Department says that number is down to 24 Americans who are stationed in the embassy, and those must leave before September 15th under an agreement under the Nigerian officials after the coup last year.
And Ukraine is now getting a big boost from a $3.9 billion grant from the United States, according to the country's prime minister. The Ukrainian financial minister stated that the money will fund teachers and provide assistance for low-income families, displaced persons, and those with disabilities. According to officials, the grant helps the nation's financial situation so that they avoid having to take on more debt amidst its current war with Russia. Ukraine will receive an equal amount of assistance sometime later this year as well. Direct budget assistance from the U.S. to Ukraine has now almost topped $27 billion since the war began back in February of 2022.
And looking further east for a quick second, North Korea is lining its border with hundreds of nuclear-capable weapons in a strong message to the U.S. and the West more broadly. According to state-run media reports, 250 vehicles capable of launching ballistic missiles are now being sent to the border shared with South Korea. Dictator Kim Jong-un claimed on Sunday the mobile launchers are needed to protect against imminent threats from the U.S., saying that Pyongyang will, quote, make the United States acutely aware that it will protect its interests with deadly force. And we have plenty more news coming up next, but first, let's go back in time with Seth Udinsky for today's A Moment in History.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. On October 14, 2003, 95 years to the day after their last World Series win, the Chicago Cubs held a 3-2 series lead in the best-of-7 NLCS against the underdog Florida Marlins. Chicago, finishing the series in front of their raucous home crowd at Wrigley Field, could taste their first World Series berth since 1945 with 1 out in the top of the 8th inning, their ace Mark Pryor throwing the game of his life on the mound, and a comfortable 3-0 lead. With a full count, Marlins infielder Luis Castillo fouled a pitch down the left field line that looked like it would fall out of play in the stands, but left fielder Moises Alou had a chance at the ball, leaping up to grab it for the second out. With several fans reaching for the foul ball, one fan accidentally batted it away from Alou's glove, preventing him from making the second out. Alou was furious, and so were the fans. What followed was a nightmarish scenario for the championship-starved Chicago Cubs. With 2 strikes, Marlins Hall of Fame catcher Ivan Rodriguez drilled a line drive to left field, scoring a run. Then Cubs shortstop Alex Gonzalez misplayed a routine ground ball that could have turned into a double play to end the inning, but ended up with still only 1 out and the bases loaded. The Cubs still held a 3-1 lead, but the Marlins now had all the momentum. Then power hitter Derek Lee, who was batting a paltry 120 in the series, doubled down the left field line to tie the game at 3. All the while, fans began to turn their wrath against Steve Bartman, the 26-year-old diehard Cubs fan who had accidentally interfered with the Alou foul ball earlier in the inning. The Marlins took the lead on a sacrifice fly ball by Jeff Conine to make it a 4-3 game with 2 outs. They then broke the game open on a bases-clearing double by Mike Mordecai to go up 7-3, and they would score one more time before the Cubs would finally stop the bleeding and record a final out in the inning. Marlins 8, Cubs 3. The Cubs would not score in either of their remaining 2 chances, and they would drop Game 6 by the same score, forcing a deciding Game 7. In the next 24 hours, Cubs sports writers and personalities pointed to Bartman as the turning point in the game. Now, Bartman, who had to be escorted from Wrigley Field in the moments after that play because the fans were beginning to threaten his safety, received numerous death threats. He issued a heartfelt apology for what happened the following day before the Cubs would square off against the Marlins in Game 7 that night. In the years that have followed, Cubs fans have understandably come under fierce scrutiny for their behavior at Game 6 that night. Bartman has remained a Cubs fan, but was driven into the shadows where, in some ways, he has remained ever since to this day. Now, it all could have been made right had the Cubs won Game 7, but again in front of their home crowd, the Cubs blew an early lead and lost Game 7 9-6, and with it, the NLCS. The Marlins would go on to win the World Series. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.
Are you new to biblically responsible investing? As Christians, we have the responsibility to be good stewards of the money God has entrusted us with. As we invest in the market, we want to make sure that the companies we invest in aren't taking money and using it to fund industries that grieve the heart of God, like pornography, abortion, gambling, or the LGBT agenda. That doesn't mean a company must be a Christian company to be biblically responsible. It means that company is solely focused on excellence in its industry and doesn't support things that God hates. To learn more about biblically responsible investing and how you can put it to practice in your portfolio, go to financialissues.org.
The mission of Financial Issues is to expose Jesus for all he is, all he means, and all that he can do.
On the day I found I was pregnant, I was full of emotions and I just was so overwhelmed, and I don't know if I'm ready for this huge life-altering, changing commitment. I had individuals around me not wanting me to have this child. And somehow, and I was driving and I saw the Women's Help Center sign and I immediately turned in. That just took relief off of me, and I was like, you know what? It's gonna be okay. They gave me the confidence and the support that I needed to be able to go out and face the world. First time I held Finnegan, I just lit up with joy. I was so excited. This little boy that I had in my life, he is loving and generous. Watching him just grow and flourish into this incredible human being has just been so rewarding and so uplifting. Looking back, I don't know what I would do without him, because I needed him more than I think he needed me.
Hey there, and welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. We're going to kick off our segment here with an update to Hurricane Debbie, which unleashed torrential rain and high winds in northern Florida just yesterday. Although it quickly downgraded to a tropical storm, Debbie still packed quite the punch, as in some parts of Florida, winds reach as high as 80 miles per hour, knocking out power for over 250,000 homes and businesses. Tragically, 5 people were killed in the storm. Both Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and President Biden have declared a state of emergency. Meanwhile, Debbie is expected to dump up to 2 feet of rain in parts of Georgia and the Carolinas by midweek.
And as always, we encourage everyone to pray for families in those areas, especially for people that you may know who live there. And just a quick warning for everyone else living on the East Coast. While the tropical storm may not make its way that far up north, some of the leftover rain and other weather events from the tropical storm could and probably will make their way up there. So be aware just in the next couple of days of any hard rain or thunderstorms of anything of that sort coming by. But with that, let's shift back into some political news for a second, where a new congressional report is bringing focus back on the border crisis under the Biden administration. The House Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, Integrity, Security, and Enforcement issued the report, which says that at least 99 illegal aliens on the terror watch list were released into the United States. According to the report, 34 others who were encountered and on the watch list are currently in DHS custody. And there have been a total of 250 illegal aliens on the watch list encountered by Border Patrol between fiscal years 2021 and 2023. This report also shed light on a story from June of this year where 8 ISIS terrorist suspects were arrested across the nation. According to that report, some of those suspects got into the U.S. after using the CBP-1 phone app. The report also found that immigration judges had apparently granted bond to at least 27 illegal migrants also on the watch list. Border Patrol has also reportedly encountered tens of thousands of illegal aliens from countries that could present national security risks, and that's all happened in this current fiscal year.
And keeping with the border here, with President Biden pausing his migrant parole program over fraud concerns, Republicans are urging him to get rid of the program altogether. As reported yesterday, the U.S. has now temporarily halted 2-year permits for people coming from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. That's all due to fraud concerns from their financial sponsors. The Department of Homeland Security says it will, quote, restart application processing as quickly as possible with appropriate safeguards, but Republicans want more than just a pause after it was now revealed that those forms were filled out by the same sponsors hundreds of times, sometimes using information from deceased individuals. House Homeland Security Committee Chair Mark Green said the fraud vindicates every warning we, that is the Republicans, have ever issued about the program.
You know, Sam, between this program and the other instances of voting we saw where apparently dead people were registered, it seems that dead people really can't stay dead anymore. They just have to be
I mean,
listed
someone's
on the
always dredging them up, right, to use them for something or other. It is very concerning.
Exactly. It is incredibly concerning, I agree. Well, let's move into some news in the tech world for right now, where Google faced a setback on Monday after a federal judge ruled that the company had violated U.S. antitrust law. On Monday, District Judge Amit Mehta ruled that Google has an illegal monopoly in the internet search industry. Mehta wrote, quote, "Google is a monopolist and it has acted as one to maintain its monopoly." Attorney General Merrick Garland praised the ruling, calling it a historic win for the American people, but Google also responded in their own statement, announcing that it plans to appeal that ruling. They also wrote, quote, "This decision recognizes that Google offers the best search engine, but concludes that we shouldn't be allowed to make it easily available." Google currently comprises roughly 90% of the online search market and 95% smartphone internet searches. The ruling was welcomed by Google's competitors, including DuckDuckGo, whose CEO actually testified against Google in the case. Although officials have discussed the potential breakup of Google, appeals to higher courts could mean that the remedy phase of that case could be delayed by as much as 2 years if the ruling is upheld.
Certainly a big deal if it does happen, though, something we'll keep an eye on here at FISM News. Elsewhere in the world of abortion, new filings now show the Biden administration has given nearly $200 million to abortion providers since 2021. Those documents show that federal agencies have been granting subsidies, contracts, and grants to numerous abortion providers and advocacy groups. Among the largest is Planned Parenthood, which is, of course, the nation's largest abortion provider and lobbying group. The group's international wing, known as the International Planned Parenthood Federation, received nearly $17 million from federal agencies to support, quote, international family planning. The group has reportedly used that money to lobby for removing restrictions on abortion and contraception in African and Asian countries. Since 2021, all Planned Parenthood groups have received at least $139 million from the White House. Other recipients include the abortion provider known as the New Jersey Family Planning League, which received over $23 million from federal agencies.
Certainly a staggering amount of funding there, but at the same time, we do have an encouraging new report which shows that pro-life maternity homes are thriving and growing in post-Roe America. The Maternity Housing Coalition revealed a personal 23% increase in their network since the Dobbs decision, and that's according to their 2023 impact report. The network is nearing 200 homes, many of which are faith-based, by the way. In all, the number of U.S. maternity homes have increased by 8% since 2022 and serve over 1,000 women. The left-leaning AP News quoted MHC Director Valerie Harkins as calling the recent expansion a, quote, significant increase. And there's now at least one home available in 48 different states. And meanwhile, the organization offers valuable training and tools to help site administrators run successful Christ-centered programs, similar to our friends over at Preborn.
That's truly wonderful news there, Ian. If you want to help Preborn, you can also go to preborn.com. But with that, that is our show for today. So thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content. You can also download the FISM app to take us on the go. Thanks so much. God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow with more news coverage.